The Bible says that heaven rejoices with the number 1. Yeah, heaven rejoices each time even one person comes to know Jesus. A daily focus on one meaningful interaction for Christ, that's the true difference maker. One friend, one family member, one coworker, one person at a time. We want to see God move in our nation like we have never seen before, but it all starts with one.
We are starting a new series, and as kind of Chris pointed out, we are in this series for a reason. Part of it was from our church assessment last fall. It was suggested to us that we kind of go through an evangelism study, one particularly called Who's Your One? And so that's what we're doing. So our sermons, we have 4 sermons on Who's Your One, and then the small group will be something attached to or to help us understand how to use this Who's Your One method. It's not really a method, I should say. It's more of a strategy. Because we're not telling you how to do this. We're trying to equip you so you can do it. So however you decide to use this material, that's between you and God. We just want to make sure you're equipped for it. So just to kind of introduce you and kind of get you on the same page with, hopefully I can share my thoughts with you enough so you can understand where I'm coming from on this Who's Your One. We live by numbers. We use numbers all the time. Your identity is attached to your cell phone number nowadays, or your address. We use numbers, right? We like big numbers in our bank accounts, especially. We don't like them as much when we're talking about our scales in our bathroom. We don't like big numbers there. We count and track and measure everything by numbers. Yet Jesus shows us that it's not the big numbers. It's not even really the smaller numbers. Jesus shows us the importance of one. The Bible tells us that there is one God and one Savior, one faith and one baptism. Jesus teaches us that in marriage, God makes the two become one. We're told in 1 Corinthians that the church is supposed to be one body with many members. The Bible tells us one is a very important number. Not like the song, one is the loneliest number. Now, one is an important number spiritually. So this year at New Beginnings, we want to focus on one. That's why we're starting this series called Who's Your One? Now, some of you have heard us kind of promote this, and you may have already kind of worked in your mind who's your one, but I want you to allow God to speak to you and maybe show you who your one needs to be. So let me share a few more numbers to help us understand the importance of one. And that is, in the U.S., there are 384,000 Protestant churches. That's a lot of churches. And there are more than 50,000 Southern Baptist churches, very similar to our church. The median church size actually is not what people often think of. The median church size is actually 70 people per church. So that gives you an idea, the number of Christians around the country, Christians that share a lot of similar beliefs. We share a lot with other Protestants, but specifically the Southern Baptist flavor of Christianity. There are a lot of people out there. Now, of the Southern Baptist churches, the 50,000 Southern Baptist churches, of about 70 people or more, about that is our number. There were 180,000 baptisms in 2022. That seems like a good number. That means that the churches, the Southern Baptist churches, shared the gospel, and people responded and were baptized. So there was 180 new believers in 2022. That sounds like a good number, right? Until you start realizing, and if you are kind of that math type of person like I am, so out of the 50,000 churches, 180,000 were baptized. That means that every church baptized about 3.6 for the year. Now, that, when you talk about it for the year, doesn't seem all that good. And so, again, I want you to be aware of the numbers, but I want you to hear what I'm saying. Because we could celebrate 3 people or 3.5 people. I don't know how the half comes in. But, maybe only half of them were saved. But I want you to hear, all those people are important. Every single one of those has a name and is an individual person. And that's what we need to focus on. Now, for us, I went back and looked at the official records. For New Beginnings, we baptized 5 people in the last 5 years. So, we have 1 per year is our average. And that 1 is important. I want you to hear me. 1 is important. But as a church, I think we could do better. I think we need to do better. We must do better because this is eternity that we're talking about. Eternity for 1 person. So if as a church we do 1, that's good. It's okay, I should say. But what if each one of us were to lead 1 person to Christ? What if each one of us had a person that we are praying for and working to build a relationship with for the purpose of sharing Christ with them? I think that could be better. I think that could be a difference maker for us. Now, again, I share all those numbers not to confuse you, not to convict you, not to overwhelm you or get you confused about this. I share those numbers so that we are just aware. But ultimately, it comes down to, it's not about a church issue. It's not about a national or a national issue. It's about us individually. God cares for us as one, as a single person. And God cares about each individual. We heard, and I am so grateful for Pastor Leroy and for Pastor Dan for the last 2 weeks because I was very sick, and I thank you for all of your prayers. I'm doing much better now. I still have a little bit more recovery to do because my energy level is down, but I'm grateful for them coming in, and I do have to correct one thing. As much as I love, and he is my friend and my brother, Pastor Leroy was wrong. I was not at home watching the football game. Well, I'll take it back. I did watch the football game after I watched a church service first. I worshiped, and then I watched football. But I didn't stay home just to watch football. I wish I was here. But both Pastor Leroy and Pastor Dan shared the idea of us sharing the gospel with people in our lives. Being focused on 1 person, getting to know 1 person that we could share the gospel with. And it is our individual responsibilities to see our 1 person that we're praying for. The Bible tells us, Jesus says specifically that heaven rejoices over 1 sinner who repents. The importance of 1. See, if I've been in churches long enough that I've been through a lot of evangelism classes and strategies and all that. That's why I don't want to call this an evangelism strategy. Because oftentimes we get burdened or we get guilted into sharing our faith with as many people as possible so that hopefully we can see one person come to Christ. We're not saying anything wrong with that, but a lot of people, that is not how they are built. That's not the way they think. That's not the way they work. Bringing it down to just praying for one person. Looking for God working in one person's life is an easier thing to pay attention to focus on, not get overwhelmed. So the question of who's your one is, do you have one person you are praying for? So in our passage today, Luke chapter 5, we're going to be reading about how Jesus saw and was focused on one person. How Jesus paid attention to Levi as his one friend in this passage. So read with me Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 27. And pay attention. Look at what Jesus does in this passage. It says, after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office. He said to him, "Follow me." So leaving everything behind, he got up and began to follow him. Then Levi hosted a grand banquet for him at his house. Now there was a large crowd of tax collectors and others who were guests with them. But the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus replied to them, "It is not those who are healthy who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." I have several questions about this encounter. You know me, I have lots of questions. I have more questions than I ever can have answers to. But I have questions such as, why would Levi leave everything at just a simple request? Why are the Pharisees and the scribes so upset, so judgmental over this situation? You know, why was Jesus so comfortable around these sinners? I have lots of questions and many more that I could talk about, but they don't really relate to the focus of our message today. But it's okay to ask those questions, to notice those things. But as we are looking at this passage, specifically asking the question of who's your one, and looking how Jesus paid attention to individuals and cared for individuals, and how Jesus made Levi his one, here we can see some things. And I want us to notice that so we can learn how to find our one. First thing I noticed, verse 27, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector. Jesus saw a person. He noticed with his eyes an individual who needed a friend. Levi, a tax collector, also known as Matthew, this is the disciple Matthew. We could get into why he had two different names, much like Jesus changed Peter's name after he started following, and we know Saul became Paul, and there's different reasons why people are known by two different names, and we could get into all that. But just know that Levi and Matthew are the same. I'll just call him Levi because that's where we read, and that's the name used here. But Levi was a tax collector. Now, if you've been in church, I'm sure you've heard many pastors, many Sunday school teachers, Bible study leaders point out the reputation of tax collectors, right? They were not good guys. They were not liked by a lot of people. They were often seen as traitors and thieves. They were seen as con artists. So you don't have too many of those friends in your life on purpose. How many of you have a friend that you know is a con artist? How long are they your friend if they're a con artist? Not long. So Levi is one of those. And he is sitting at his office. Now we think of an office nowadays like you got AC and you got heaters, especially today. Hopefully their heater is working and their pipes aren't frozen. But you think of an office and you think of a place where they're kind of more private. They may have advertising on the door or window, but it's somewhere that they can go and sit in an office and not be seen or not be out in public. Back in biblical times, the office could have been just a table sitting out in the courtyard somewhere. Could have been just on the street corner, and that was his office. So Jesus sees Levi sitting there all alone. And he sees the person, not the reputation of his job or the reputation of maybe even him. Jesus just sees a person. Jesus was out in the city, walking about, doing his thing, teaching, preaching, healing. And he notices Levi all alone. Jesus was looking for someone who needed a friend. Who needs a friend more than a tax collector? People avoided the tax collector. They definitely would cross on the other side of the street to avoid him and ignore him. And so who needs a friend more than a tax collector? In our society, we have different people who are kind of like this. Their reputation keeps them isolated, keeps them away from having real friends. Sometimes of their own doing, and sometimes just because of the position they're put in. But our society has these types of people all around us. They're walking through the grocery stores and at the mall. They're in our doctor's offices and where we go to get things done. We walk into businesses and we're surrounded by people who are there, but they are all alone. Jesus starts this relationship. Now, I don't know how. The text doesn't tell us how. But he knows that this tax collector's name is Levi. I don't know if he had one of those name plaques on his desk. You know, that's helpful. Although sometimes I always wondered, why would I put my name on my desk? But maybe he had one of those so people knew his name. Maybe he had a big banner and said, Levi's Tax Services. I don't know, but somehow Jesus found out this guy's name and he called him by his name. You know, if we're going to see a person, if we're going to notice a person who needs a friend, it's a good idea to get to know their name. Oh, and I've heard everybody give excuses like this. Well, I'm not good about remembering people's names. You know, I'm just not good at that. If you're going to start a relationship with someone, it's good to know their name, to find out their name. And Jesus found out Levi's name. And he called him by his name. It's such a simple thing, yet it's one of the most personal details we have. It's what makes us unique. Now, I know, William Shakespeare said, "What is in a name?" And he said, "A rose called by any other name is still such as sweet." But our names identify us as us. They're what makes us who we are. Now, I know in our society, people change their names and what they're called all the time. It's important, though, to call them by what their name is. Find out their name. Call them by their name, because that's what they're using as an identifier for them. And it's very important that Jesus saw Levi as a person and got to know his name. But then what happens next is very important. Jesus invites the person. Now, it's a simple invitation. Come, follow me. Most of our translations just say, follow me. Now, I've heard some preachers say that there's a lot to this. And then I've seen other people that says it's just 2 words. It's just follow me, or come follow me. And Jesus says that many times in Scripture. I take it as, reading here, it is a simple invitation. Some pastors have said, well, it was a command, so he had to get up and leave everything. I see it more of an invitation. He could have rejected it. He could have ignored it. Levi could have just sat there and say, no, I'm busy, even though he wasn't doing anything. But the simple invitation was meaningful because Levi needed that friend, and Jesus looked him in the eye, knew his name, and said, follow me. Come, follow me. To follow someone in that day meant that you were going to do life together. You were going to share moments. You were going to go out and celebrate life's big moments, the celebrations of, accomplishments and celebrating birthdays and life events. You would celebrate that together when you were following someone, when you were doing life together. You were there for those big moments, but you were also going to be there when they were suffering. You would suffer along together during those tough times. That if one of you was having a hard time with something, the other person, whoever you were following or who was in that relationship together, you would suffer together. They would be with you when you were crying, when you were weeping. They would be with you when you were struggling, maybe with depression or an addiction. They would be there for you and with you in those times. But one of the biggest things, and we see from here, if you were going to follow someone, if you were going to do life together, the most important thing about that was you got to eat together. Eating together is very important. No matter what you say, you want to become my friend, give me food. And I eat just about any kind of food except for hummus. I don't like hummus. Or hominy. I don't know who likes hominy. If you tell, okay, 2 people do, including my wife. But I don't get it. Anyways, we won't talk about hominy anymore. But if you want to be my friend, food is a good way to get to know me and for me to start liking you. I like to eat. There's a lot of people who like to eat. Do you know that? So if you are wanting to invite a person, probably one of the best ways is to invite them to a meal. Nowadays, something like a coffee shop or, just going out for something as simple as that. Maybe you don't want to spend a whole meal with someone or you're afraid that would intimidate them. So just go out for a short appointment, like a coffee or a tea or a beverage, something like that. But as you get to know them more and as your friendship develops more, have a full-on meal and make it a regular part of your time together. There's something about when we sit down and we start eating, it loosens up our jaw, and so we can start talking more too. And it's just a simple invitation. Hey, come out to lunch with me. Hey, I want to buy you dinner. Hey, I'm throwing a barbecue. Well, not today, but maybe in the summer. I'm throwing a barbecue. You want to come over and have some hamburger, hot dogs? But just having that moment, that time together, means that those two individuals will be doing life side by side from now on. They would be sharing in those moments. Have you had a friend like that? Someone who walked beside you during those good times and those bad times? How important has that person become in your life? How important were they for the moment? Simple invitation. Hey, let's go out for dinner. Let's go out for lunch. Jesus said, come follow me. Let's start doing life together. And Levi was so lonely and so afraid that he jumped at the occasion to actually have a real friend. And it was awesome. And then we see that Levi hosted a grand banquet for him. Now, this goes beyond just having a meal. We think of banquet, and that's usually where our mind goes. We go back to the food issue. But this was bigger than that. A grand banquet requires someone to spend a lot of time together. So Jesus spent time with the person. He spends time with them, and it's significant time, more than just a meal. See, a banquet, the average time, I had to look this up because we don't do banquets a lot anymore. Unless you had a kid that was involved with sports, because they do, at schools, they do sport banquets every year. Do you remember how long those sport banquets were? Okay. They're long. They're not just sit down and have a meal. No, they're a long program that you're going through. So when we talk about a banquet here, Levi hosted a grand banquet. It was a long event. The typical time for a banquet is somewhere around 4 to 6 hours that you're sitting there together doing something. And yes, the good ones have food involved. Of course, we're going back to that. But the closest thing we have nowadays to a banquet, according to my research, was something like a wedding reception. And those, think about how long those are. The wedding ceremony, maybe not that long, might be up to an hour. But the reception, those go on. And on. And sometimes on, depending on what they're doing, but they can go on into the night, into the next day, some of them. They spend time together doing things. Or the other example of a modern day banquet is a luau. Not just the roasting of a pig, but like the whole luau, like if you go to Hawaii, and they do a luau, it's a full-on production with dancing ceremonies and eating and then torch displays and all that fire stuff, and which sounds really cool. I want to experience it someday, but they go on. They're not just you come in and sit down for an hour and then you're done. No, they are, again, a long-term thing. Jesus spent time with Levi and with his friends. This was a social engagement that was significant. It was an investment. It took time. And here is where the Pharisees and their scribes were sitting there. I never understood this. Why are the Pharisees complaining about something they're obviously at as well? I mean, they're not just standing there at the gate watching this go on and then complaining, are they? I mean, that's a whole nother level of creepy and weird. But if they're there and they can see that Jesus is with these people, spending time with them, that means they have to be there too. So again, don't understand why they're complaining about it, but my focus was on Jesus in my studies here. So I noticed that Jesus was comfortable around these people. Yes, he's spending time with them, but it's not awkward for either side. It's not strange in Jesus' world to be around these types of people because he's loving them and he's wanting to build a relationship with them. He sees them as someone that needs this type of care. That's why he said that that he did not come for the healthy, but for the sick. He did not come for the righteous, but for the sinner. So Jesus was spending time with these people all for that purpose of he cared for that person. He cared for the individual, for the one. See, yes, he spent time with all those people that were at that banquet, and we don't know how many people were there. I expect there was a large number of Levi's social friends. They weren't his close friends because he felt lonely. But for his social friends, Jesus was hanging out with them, but he was there because Levi was there. He cared for Levi because Levi was the one he was building that friendship with, building that relationship with. Jesus cared about Levi's physical and emotional health. Yes, that's part of the reason why he became his friend. Do you know science has actually proven that loneliness, especially after the pandemic, loneliness is equal to a significant health risk as much as if you were smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Physically, loneliness is just as risky, just as scary as if you had a smoking habit of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, if the Surgeon General has to give a warning on a pack of cigarettes describing how dangerous this is, why don't we have as much warning about loneliness in our society? About the mental health of individuals. And so if you were just to build a friendship with one person, how much does that affect their physical and emotional health, their mental health? And Jesus addressed the physical and emotional, and then he was able to address the spiritual. Church people often struggle with this whole idea of how to engage sinners, how to engage the lost, unchurched around us. We don't know how to do that anymore, it seems like, because we're comfortable in our church world. And yes, it's important for us to gather together for encouragement and equipping of each other, but that whole gathering together for encouragement and equipping is so that we can go out. Jesus sent his disciples out. He told us to go and make disciples, to go and find our one. Jesus found individuals. Christians often hold the idea that our holiness, our spiritual purity it requires us to have total separation from sinners. I've heard that. I've seen church people say that we need to isolate and separate ourselves, that we need to be different and secluded. We think the word holiness, being set apart, means that we need to be completely removed from this world. If that was God's intention, the moment we were saved, we would be taken to heaven. That would be nice. We wouldn't have to deal with the sin of this world anymore. The heartache, the pain. We'd just go straight from, I put my faith in Jesus Christ on his death, burial, and resurrection. I'm saved now by grace through faith, and I'm out of here. See ya, I wouldn't want to be ya. Y'all can deal with this world. I'm going to go live in heaven. But Jesus shows us in this idea, he challenges the way we think about holiness. Jesus doesn't isolate or separate himself from the sinners. He goes to the sinners because those are the very people he came to save. Those are the very people that he loved so much that he died on the cross for. And if we call ourselves Christians, we are supposed to be just like Christ. We are supposed to love the sinners the way that Christ loved the sinners. One of the things that Christians, we oftentimes forget is we were once that sinner. And someone had to come to us in our sin to share Christ with us. You were someone's one. Think about that. Who was it that led you to Jesus? Who was it? It could have been a family member, a father, a mother, a grandparent who shared Christ with you in your sin. They had a relationship with you. They cared about you. They spent time with you. They shared Christ with you. Some of you, it may have been a pastor or a church leader, a Sunday school teacher that shared Christ with you, and you came to know the saving grace of God because of them building a relationship with you, taking time to know you and to share the gospel with you. Some of you, it may have been a neighbor or a family friend, or it could have been just a stranger. Someone made you their one person that they were praying for and cared enough about to build that relationship. And that's what this series, that's what the challenge is for us as a church this year, is let's start developing friendships and being prayerful and mindful enough to make these people that need to know Christ, to make them our friend first, not just a target. See, Jesus got to know Levi and built a friendship with him. And you'd be surprised at how quickly it can go. I know some people have an idea of friendship evangelism, and that's not exactly what I'm talking about. Although it sounds very similar because those terms are used in different ways. But when you start building a friendship with someone, how quickly you earn the right to share the gospel. How quickly they are interested in, why are you different than everybody else? Why do you care about me in a different way than even my high school buddies that I've been friends with for decades? Why do you care more than they do? Because if we were to take this example of Jesus and do it just like Jesus did, that friend will trust us quickly. That's why Jesus earned the right with Levi so fast. Do you know that there is a friendship epidemic in the United States right now? Studies show us that 8% of U.S. adults have no friends at all. That means 2 out of every 25 people that you know feel like they're all alone, isolated, and they have no one to count on. There's plenty of people out there who need one person to be a friend. So my question to you today is, let's start by becoming someone's friend. Who's your one? Who is someone in your life that needs you to be their friend? To show them kindness, to invite them into a relationship, to care for them enough to spend time with them in their setting as well as in your setting. One of the best ways that I heard, especially this applies to us because we have a lot of people moving into the area. We have a lot of new people in our communities and neighborhoods. So listen for the 3 nots. This is what I've heard. This is the way it was put. Listen for the 3 nots. These are statements that people will say that open the door for you to start a friendship with them. The first one is, well, things aren't going so well. Things are not going well. That's almost the door swinging wide open. I need a friend. Things aren't going so well. I need someone to walk through this with me. The second not statement was, I was not prepared for that. Do you know anyone who's been blindsided by life lately? Who was caught off guard with maybe a diagnosis or maybe a crisis event that happened in their family or in their finances or in their world? I was not prepared for that. The other one, and this one is the one that definitely applies to us. Well, I'm not from around here. We hear that a lot nowadays. Those are all invitations. Those are all like neon signs saying, I need a friend. I need someone to come alongside of me. And so one of the things, if you hear one of those 3 not statements, the simplest thing to do, well, can I pray for you? How can I pray for you? The other thing, and this is going to be more of, we're going to get into this in the series, but to look for people who are close to you, but far from God. Those are the people who need to have a friend. So do you have that one yet? As we were going through this message, as you were reading about how Jesus focused on and made Levi his one for this time, did someone come to mind?